Alright guys, I'm back. So, secondary succession. Secondary succession, it begins in a place that already has soil and was once the home of living organisms. So contrary to primary succession, secondary succession happens in a place where there already once was an ecosystem. And it occurs when that community has been disrupted. So what I mean by disruptions is things like a forest fire or some sort of natural disaster, things like foresting, winds, that sort of thing, maybe a tornado. So by foresting, I mean like chopping down trees, maybe after farming. Those are disruptions that can cause secondary succession. And secondary succession occurs faster and has different pioneer species than primary succession. Okay, so the community begins again where the former community was disrupted. So soil is already present. So what I'm saying is that we don't have to start back at the lichen stage. We can start with grasses, with small things like that. So here is a picture of secondary succession. So it might start with some annual weeds. So you can see the annual weeds here. It might start with some, and then move into some perennial weeds. Then finally some pine saplings and seedlings and saplings. Then go to young forest and mature hardwood forest. And you can see how long these things take. So annual weeds start after a year. Perennial weeds maybe 2 to 4 years. Pine seedlings and saplings 5 years. Young pine forest 25 to 50 years. And then by the time we get to that mature forest, we're talking like 100, 150 years later. So because you know those trees take a while to grow. So here's another picture of how this might look. So you're seeing here down at the beach, we can see that there's not a whole lot of those sorts of organisms, but as we're moving up into the forest, you can see we start to get these communities. So you can see the progression of how this thing works out, and that's because here, this area right here, there's not a ton of soil right there, and gradually as the water is changing, you might start to see more soil in this area. So you can see that thing, the succession, secondary succession taking place just by maybe walking up this beach into the forest, because you can see as we're moving this way in the forest, or from the beach to the forest, we see different stages of succession. So, I've only talked about plants so far, but organisms go along with that as well. So you can see when the grass is present, you have some different types of birds. So like this grasshopper sparrow that is going to move in, and then once we move to the low shrub portion of our succession stages, you might get other different things to move in as well. So maybe something like this meadowlark, and then when we get to shrubs and trees, you'll see that we get these species to move out. So these aren't going to be there anymore. Those are going to move out because that's not a good habitat for them. And we're going to get other things to move in, maybe like a ruffed grouse, some white-tailed deer, maybe a squirrel or two. And then finally, once we get to the end of succession, you can see once we have those high trees, these are also going to move out. Some of them anyways, like this ruffed grouse will, and then the white-tailed deer will. And we'll get things like foxes to be in here, some white-footed mouse. So you can see the animal community changes as well. It's not just the plant community. So take some time studying this chart because it's pretty important. And take note of the different plants and animals that can be present in these areas. And you'll see also on the bottom it shows time in years. So this is as time is progressing, different things are moving in and out. And take note, so once we get to this stage where we're in these high trees, what happens now? So what's the deal? Now we've gotten to these high trees and they're gonna stick there for a while. What happens now? So that community that forms, that high tree community with the foxes and the other things that are staying there, that is a climax community. So a climax community is a stable group of plants and animals that is the end result of the succession process. And it doesn't always mean big trees or grasses in prairies. It can mean grasses in prairies. That is the climax community in the prairie. Or it can mean cacti in the desert. That is the climax community for the desert. And the same climax community will develop unless the abiotic conditions have changed. So take note of that. So every time there's like a forest fire, the same community will eventually develop unless something has changed with those abiotic conditions. But what happens if you just go to an area and you don't know? How do you know if something is a climax community? So a climax community replaces itself with more of itself. So over time, it will continue to stay the same unless there is a disruption. So, for example, I have some pictures here of some sugar maple trees, and we will see sugar maple tree saplings that show that is a climax community. So there's a forest of sugar maple trees, and more sugar maple trees are growing in that community. That is a climax community. Anyways, now why? So now we get into why. So why does ecological succession occur? It occurs because it is the process of life for plants, soil, and other living organisms. It occurs because organisms alter soil structure, chemistry, and microclimates. The species composition of ecological communities constantly changes over time. Our Earth is constantly changing, and this is part of it. And each community changes the conditions so that they are more favorable to other organisms that replace them. So succession will continue until the environment reaches its final stage, the climax community. And it's kind of cyclical. So here is a picture of the cycle that takes place. So we can start anywhere in the cycle because it's a cycle. So you're going to have grasses, and those succession will take place, and you'll get shrubs, then you'll get small trees, and then you'll get your climax community. So in this case, it's a forest. And then you'll have some sort of disturbance. So you'll have a fire. So here's my drawing of a fire, and that does not look like a fire. So I'm going to write the word fire. So we have a fire. We have some sort of disturbance. And then all of a sudden, we have to start the process over again. And we go grasses to shrubs to small trees to climax forest. And then eventually another disturbance will happen. And this is cyclical, so it'll just keep happening and happening and happening. So let's take a look at some climax communities. So these are climax communities. You see in the top left here, so this one right here, the number 1, that is a desert climax community. And now here is a short grass prairie. So this looks a lot like, if we look outside, what it looks like out there. That is also a climax community. And then here we see that this is a pine forest, number 3. That's a pine forest. That's also a climax community. And then old growth rainforest, like in number 4, that is a really, really cool climax community. So those are some examples of what some climax communities could look like. So next up is what determines the community. And there are 2 main physical factors that determine the nature of a community that develops in an area. And these 2 things that are really important are temperature and rainfall. And both of these are influenced by latitude and elevation. And we talked about what makes up an ecosystem. And what makes up an ecosystem, so the other video that I showed you guys, or I had you guys watch the other day, those are going to be factors that helps to determine the community. And now we're going to briefly talk about aquatic succession. So aquatic succession occurs in the same fashion that terrestrial succession, so succession that we've talked about before, so from grasses to a forest, so land succession. It occurs the same way, but freshwater aquatic ecosystems eventually develop into a terrestrial ecosystem. Now, that might sound kind of weird, but imagine a pond, for example. Sediment and detritus, so these different materials, fill a pond or lake. Eventually, the amount of water decreases. A meadow is a transitional stage, and I'll show you what it looks like in a minute. And you develop into like a bog or a forest eventually. So all of a sudden, your pond, after 100 years or so, turns into this bog or this forest. That's aquatic succession. So let's take a look at that. So you start with this nice pond here in 1840. Eventually, you see the material is starting to fill in the pond, and gradually it turns into there's no more water. And all of a sudden, we start to look just like land, and we get a forest growing. And eventually, when that forest or that bog grows, now your pond is all the way filled in. You see your pond is all the way filled in there. That is succession from a pond to a prairie or a forest. So now I want to give you another example. And I'm going to talk about ecological succession on a coral reef, just briefly. Alright, so what you see here in this picture is some sort of lava flow or something that is happening over a coral, some sort of lava flow that is happening deep in the ocean. And so you'll see, here's our lava. I'll draw an arrow to it right there. And then, so this is a lava flow in the Hawaii that shelf that creates a coral that can colonize. This is primary succession, right? Because we're starting from something where life previously didn't exist. And after 3 months, you see that the lava has dried, and we just have what looks to be like a rocky lava rock surface. After 10 years of lava flow, we now have fast-growing, fast-reproducing, not long-lived coral. So you'll see it's kind of smaller on the smaller side. Then after 15 years, we get some fish to move in and some longer-lived coral to move in. Then, after 40 years, we get longer-lived coral that compete and take over. And then after 100 years, we finally get to this climax community of long-lived coral, and you can see fish and other organisms that are gonna live in here, and maybe some sharks, maybe some other aquatic organisms. This is late succession. This is our climax community. So that about wraps up succession, guys. If you're still having questions, go to this video and watch that. It is 2.5 minutes, and it compares and contrasts a primary and secondary succession. If you have questions, please feel free to ask me. Just because I make these videos doesn't mean I don't want to talk to you guys. I just thought this would be easier for you guys to learn from for this particular topic. So if you're getting primary and secondary succession, you don't need to go watch this link up here. But if you're having some questions or something like that, it is a really good video. It's 2.5 minutes, and it plays the Circle of Life, so the Circle of Life song. So it's pretty neat. I really do recommend it if you guys want to. And now what you guys need to do is create a Venn diagram and compare and contrast primary and secondary succession. And when you create this Venn diagram, I don't want just a little one. I want like a full page Venn diagram that you can compare and contrast primary and secondary succession. So thanks so much for paying attention and watching the video. I hope you guys liked it. Please give me feedback. I want to improve. I want to teach you guys in the way that works best for you guys.